Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the HR Huddle. I'm your host, Teri Zipper, CEO and Managing Partner at Sapient Insights Group. And I'm back for another exciting episode of HR We Have a Problem. This is the show where we break down the big and most relevant HR issues of the day. We help you make sense of what they mean for you, and we talk about what you might do about them. Joining me today is Danielle Bushen. Danielle leads people analytics, data governance, and stewardship at Sanofi. I hope I said that right. A global healthcare and pharma company. Welcome, Danielle. Always great to catch up and excited to have you on the show.
Thanks so much, Teri. It's great to be here.
That sounds like a big set of responsibilities. People analytics, data governance, and stewardship. What was the journey there to people analytics from your current life of more HR related background?
Yeah, it's interesting. Sanofi is an organization that's in transition. It's moving to a level of digital enablement and AI focus, in particular, around the core pharmaceutical business that is really the future of biotech. And as part of that, all of the corporate functions are moving in the same direction. And so I joined Sanofi, and by the way, some people call it Sanofi, some people call it Sanofi. We're all still debating internally what the name really should be. But yeah, I joined in August of last year in a new role of HR data governance, and we call it people and culture. And I'm aligned to the analytics team because the quality of our data is what drives our analytics. I spent 4 years running people analytics in a big financial services firm here in Canada, where I'm based. And this opportunity came up to really create a new culture of data-driven decision-making in HR in an organization that hadn't had it before. And we really haven't thought in a disciplined way about what data could be as a strategic asset for the organization. And so that's the opportunity I have now, is to really make that a part of our ethos and our culture, and to be thinking about everything from the employee's perspective on their own data and data privacy and the ethics of data in the world of AI, to how do we collect and integrate data through all of our end-to-end processes. And that's something that the HR function really needs to step up to, I think, everywhere, because it's what enables that sort of consumer grade experience in the work experience. When your processes drive the collection of the data in a super seamless way and give you back those experiences that you expect to be really effortless, that kind of surprises and delights. It makes for the best work environment. And I think that's a challenge for all HR organizations.
Yeah, I think data is often overlooked for the more exciting and cool HR technologies and bright, shiny objects, I think, as we like to call them. But it's obviously critical to the success of our programs. And that's what I really would like to focus on today, is really to talk about data and governance, why it's important, and what we can do to simplify it or make it easier overall, and really get people more engaged in it. Does that sound like a good plan to you?
That's a great plan. I think data governance in general is something that people think about as a compliance problem, this big hurdle that needs to be overcome. And I think it does need to be more accessible. It also needs to be seen as an enabler. It's what makes it easier to do great work.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's get into the huddle. So we have certainly talked about data on this show. We've talked about all the magic and taking advantage of your data, but it can be a behemoth. I mean, before we go too far into this, let's talk about what we mean by data governance. What is it that we're trying to explore here specifically?
So I think of data governance a couple of ways. First, I do not think of it as a compliance activity. I see it as that thing that is the muscle that we all need to exercise to inform our processes, to take ownership of them, and then to allow the technology to support execution. And that means that we need owners of the processes who are thinking about the definition of their data. And then we need to use that to inform our collection strategies, our cleaning strategies, our storage models, the ethics of how we deploy the use of data. And at the very tail end of all of that is the opportunity to consume and use data, to do the democratization and the fancy insights and the visualization. And that's usually where people start, is thinking about those pieces. And that's the outcome for sure.
Yeah.
It's what we all want to get to. But if you make the time to really think about the governance of those processes at the input stage, then you get the magic.
Yeah. So basically policies, processes, and procedures, right? But the things that people equate to compliance. I agree with you. I think at the end of the day, the outcomes are what we're focused on. And we do spend a lot of time on how we want to get those outcomes through reporting and data analytics and those types of things. I think we get hung up on how that's going to work in a technology versus how do we even make sure we have good, clean data and the data is secure and it's private and it's used by the people who can use it and should use it, and sort of what they should be doing with it.
Yeah, I mean, I think depending on where you are in the world, there are different levels of focus on how you use it. How private does it need to be? In our organization, we're headquartered in France. We have a huge presence in Europe. So GDPR is really important in our world. And that brings with it certain obligations and a focus on thinking about the approach to advising people of how you're using data. And it brings a rigor to the analytics that if you've got the right masking in place, if you've got the right employee notifications in place about what are you trying to do and how does it benefit them, and you can assure them that their data is well protected, I think that opens so many interesting doors for the HR function. And it's kind of a new way of thinking about data as a strategic asset. I think the challenge for HR people, for those owners of processes and the people who are working in centers of excellence and thinking about what they want to know, is to really define their requirements up front, know what it is they're trying to achieve, be thoughtful about how they create transparency. There should be no secrets in terms of how data is being used. That doesn't mean it can't be used in some really interesting and creative ways.
Yeah. I agree. I think what we spend a lot of time thinking about the requirements we need for new tech, but not necessarily the requirements that we need to actually get the data and the answers that we need from that data. Right?
Yeah. I mean, you talked about the bright, shiny objects and all the great technology that's out there. And there's some fantastic technology that vendors are putting out. But I think it behooves us all to remember that every vendor is going to show you the best version of that product that they can. And they are going to have their demo set up with a perfect data set. And we all know that our data sets are never perfect. And so every feature is going to look fantastic. And what I really encourage people to think about, especially in the vendor selection process, is what does our data actually look like? What's its maturity? What problems do we have in the hygiene of our data today? And, garbage in, garbage out, right? Like if you want that bright, shiny object to be as shiny as the vendor makes it look, you have to be prepared to invest in the data to make the system run well. And I think that's something that people sometimes forget.
Yeah. We do talk a lot about strategic HR on the show, and some of the most mundane things can actually support an organization in terms of being strategic, if you will. You talked a little bit about the importance of this data and data governance being a strategic aspect of HR. Where does that fit into the overall spectrum? How can people sort of visualize, how do I make sure my data governance aligns with the business outcomes that we have for the organization?
I think for me, data governance is all about understanding the foundations of your HR function. Dave Ulrich describes the human capability model, and he talks about that as a taxonomy for HR. He's talking about the data governance, the framework of the HR function itself. He doesn't use those words typically, but he talks about grouping human capability into sort of four big buckets: one around leadership, one around talent and competence, and one around the capabilities of the organization, how it's organized. And then it's underpinned by all the transactional HR effectiveness work. And that is exactly the strategic opportunity that HR has. Is it doesn't matter which tool set you picked. It doesn't matter where you are in the evolution of the organization. If you're a startup, if you're a really complex multinational, if you know what your business objectives are and which processes are most essential for your talent roadmap and your HR function, you can deploy the right tools against that. And you might have parts of your work that are very simplistic and stored in a spreadsheet, and parts of it that are super sophisticated and stored in a complex object-oriented model. Doesn't matter. It's about thinking through what are those data attributes that are most important and reflect your business objectives. People often get worried when they're thinking about data governance that they have to know Informatica or Calibra or one of these other tools that are designed to help you organize your data. And what I say to people is, from an HR perspective, you don't need to know all of that. But what you do need to know is your business objectives and what requirements you have. You can partner with an IT expert to help you with the tool set. That is 100% something that can be done. But if you don't know what you're trying to achieve for the HR function itself and can't define and disambiguate those weird places in the process that, well, yeah, sometimes it's like that, but sometimes it's like this. And, oh, yeah, but we can't do it that way in this one country because of X and Y. If you can't put those things down on paper in a way that says these are not exceptions, these are deliberate decisions that we have made in support of our HR processes, and it's what we want to have for our organization, then your data will never really be very clean. So that's the opportunity, is to really know, be an expert in your processes and the associated data that they generate.
Yeah, it comes back to the rules and sort of, documenting what you want from it. Because if you don't, you're never going to get it. We're experiencing that on a very small scale with the CRM, where 2 years ago we were putting certain data into a field, and now we're like, what exactly were we doing with that data? And what is that supposed to mean? And is that supposed to help us make some decision? Like, I don't know what to do with this. So it could be very different for very small companies, but I think the earlier you start thinking about this, anytime you implement a new system, the better off you're going to be over the long term, and documenting it. I mean, it feels mundane and hard and boring, but at the end of the day, it's how you communicate with the people in the organization about what this information represents.
It's also how you make something that seems really complicated and maybe have a lot of variability in it feel really simple. And so I think of that as an exciting puzzle to solve. People pick up their iPhones or whatever smartphone they have every day, and they just expect it to work for them. And it feels super simple, and you can access all these different features and capabilities. I guarantee you the engineers at Apple did not feel like it was easy while they were designing it. But that was the goal, is to make it have that consumer grade experience that feels totally effortless.
Yeah, I just interviewed the CMO from iSolved a few weeks ago, and we talked a lot about employee experience and sort of bringing marketing and HR together, and what was driving the employee experience. You mentioned that a minute ago about this whole data governance process and sort of data overall. What do you see as the connection here between the data and the ideal employee experience?
Employee experience in today's world is the consumer experience in many ways. And we have Amazon and Uber and Google and everybody in Meta to thank for that, because they have made it part of our everyday life. And all of those organizations put data at the center and at the heart of the way they design their product, the way they build their experience. They curate their data, they think about their data, they view it as the asset and the engine of the organization. And I think a lot of traditional companies that aren't in the tech space see data as that thing out on the side that kind of needs to be dealt with at some point. Oliver Mollander is a blogger who focuses on data and AI. He's an entrepreneur. And he has this great visual of data really at the center in those tech companies, and data, this thing that's off on the side that I might get to after I think about my processes and my tools and everything else. And when you do that, you lose sight of the opportunity that data is there to create sort of strategic insight and to integrate the way you're organizing your data into the strategic opportunities that you're pursuing. And I think in the world of AI, where AI can bring insight and create capability for any kind of business, bringing that data right to the heart of it will really help uncover opportunities that weren't there before, that you didn't even necessarily recognize. And so when you're thinking about the employee experience, the employee doesn't necessarily even know what it is they're looking for in the workplace. But when you bring that to the forefront and make a process easier that I've had to do every single day, I had to log in, I had to do my time tracking, I had to do this thing, I had to do that thing, I had to log out of this portal before I went to the next portal, and I had to remember the password that's not integrated, and all of these other crazy things that happen in people's work lives. When you ease those burdens and make the experience of being at work that much more effective for the individual, it lets them focus on the things that allow them to really add value. And that's what they're there for. And I think sometimes we get caught up in, oh, yeah, you can't do that because of this single sign-on problem or that regulatory issue. And we sort of stop there and say, oh, well, I can't do anything about that. But that's where we should really own the work experience and make it something amazing.
Roadblocks, right? So I saw the picture, his visual, I thought was also very cool and it's very accurate in terms of just the tech companies today. The data is embedded, right? It's the center kind of the universe. Everything flows out from that. Whereas most organizations, the data sits outside that bubble. And I'm guessing that's the kind of thing you're dealing with right now is how do we get the data from outside the bubble to inside the bubble where it becomes the center of this universe? What do you think are some of the biggest challenges teams are grappling with today, kind of trying to do that kind of thing?
I think some of it is as basic as ingrained habits. It's habit forming. If your data has not been at the center, and it's real easy to say, oh, yeah, we've implemented that tool, it will just run now, or he is taking care of that piece for us, you lose sight of that strategic asset of the data. So bringing it into the bubble, first of all, making it a habit to be thinking about it as part of your end-to-end process every day, that in itself is huge. And if you haven't, as an HR person, if you haven't been thinking that way, that's a new muscle to flex and a new habit to build. I also think that it's about ruthless prioritization. None of us will ever have a perfect set of data with one bubble in the middle. I think at last count at Sanofi, we were looking at about 200 separate bubbles. And that's just the reality of big, complicated organizations, right?
Yep.
Like we have lots of apps, lots of regulatory constraints from different parts of the world, lots of different domains of data and specialty products that all need to be managed. And that doesn't make it easy. That doesn't make it feel seamless and effortless. And there are tons of roadblocks that creep in, both because of decisions that have been made over the years and technical debt that never gets resolved and legacy decisions that say, oh, why did we do that? And you start asking around and nobody even knows anymore. Why did we do that? So all of that makes the bubble into like we're having a bubble bath now. And so that's hard.
Yeah.
But I think it's about really taking ownership. It's about saying, that's my bubble, and I'm going to bring it to the center, and I'm going to make sure that it is really something that I have cultivated and curated, and that I understand how it's going to deliver quality and value.
Yeah. Do you have a particular pet peeve when it comes to sort of how people are using the data or things people say about the data that just sort of really got to change? Speaking of habits, I really got to get them to change this habit, or really got to change this habit, or we're never gonna make this successful.
It's probably a pet peeve and then just a risk that I see all the time. The pet peeve is, oh yeah, no, that's a regulatory thing. We can't change that. And so they've been told that for years and years, and people have always said, yeah, that's regulatory. But then when you press and you say, okay, show me the regulatory requirement. What are we talking about? What can't we do? Why can't we do it? Nobody knows. And it's become this urban legend of that's regulatory. We can't touch that. But actually, it's not even true. And so we create handcuffs for ourselves in HR that actually are unnecessary. And so what I try and remind people of is be curious, be thoughtful, ask more questions. Because when you can do that, you may uncover that the barrier that you thought was there isn't a barrier at all. So that's the pet peeve piece for me is just keep asking questions, be curious, don't take things at face value. And then other piece of it that I think is a challenge is not just this idea of what's regulatory, but also that there's something that happens when an organization has layers upon layers of stuff over time, that we don't go back and we don't clean house. We just keep layering on. So the cake gets bigger, there's more ingredients in the cake. And sometimes you just need to edit and say, actually, too much stuff going on here. We don't need all of this anymore. And be really good at knowing when you need to start sunsetting stuff or deprecating old tech. You're never going to keep all the layers of code that told you exactly how finance organized the cost center hierarchy 25 years ago.
Right.
They've replaced that technology 3 times since then. HR doesn't need to keep being able to reference it. So move on. Give yourself permission to let go of the past as you start to invent for the future.
Yeah. And we were kind of blown away too by the numbers of just the sheer numbers of HR applications that even small organizations with under 50 employees are using 10 or more different solutions that actually touch HR in some way. So there's a lot of data going in. Where's it going? What kind of information can we get out of that? And I think about the reporting, and that usually is the thing at the forefront, right? It's, well, I can't report on this because our data's crap. How do I need this kind of reporting? And there's a lot of trial and error running reports to see where is the right data, stumbling onto those fields. But this is it's a key outcome is to be able to deliver reporting, especially to the metrics that we share with executives. I mean, these are the kinds of things we need to come out of this data. And it couldn't be more important to get that data right.
And that doesn't always mean that HR has to invent all of that data. That's actually something that I think we do at our peril at times. You know, we all have an HRIS of some kind, bigger, slicker, fancier, simpler, more basic, doesn't matter. And we all know who reports to who in the company. That's sort of the nuts and bolts of HR. But that's not the whole language of HR. We talk a lot about headcount, and we want to know the cost base and the metrics of our headcount and how many people are active and inactive and all of these different lenses of the data. And when you go and ask somebody in finance for their definition of active and inactive, or who's paying for that headcount, or even what is a headcount? Is it a person, or is it an economic unit of measure of an FTE? Yeah. We all have these different ways of talking about it. And it's incumbent upon the HR professionals to learn to speak the language of their peers in finance, in real estate, in IT, who talk about users, which is sounds a lot like heads. Users are probably people too, but what about the bots? Those are users. And so we get hung up on all these differences of interpretation instead of really making sure that we've found good ways to talk to each other and to be able to do that reporting in ways that reflect the lens that each of those stakeholders really wants to see the data through. And I think that's the place where HR can really be a strategic enabler. When we can learn to reflect those other languages in how we're looking at the people data, we gain so much credibility, and we help the organization move forward and come to alignment on things that sometimes have been problems for years.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I've found that HR tries to own a lot more than they need to, or not necessarily own it, but take responsibility for it when sometimes it's not their responsibility, but they need to be able to help people get where they need to be with respect to some of these things. So while it may not be theirs to own, it's theirs to help shepherd.
And also theirs to reflect correctly. If somebody else has defined a particular hierarchy that's super important to the way your organization is designed, reflect that back. They are the source of truth.
Yeah.
They own it. Be a great consumer. Reflect it back. And then when they realize, oh, that's actually not what we intended, they'll update it. That's great partnership as well. And it doesn't mean you have to reinvent the wheel for everybody else all the time.
Yeah. So how do you see AI coming into the picture for this? Because obviously, feels to me like this is a great place for AI to intervene, right? And help us with outdated thinking and data and that kind of thing. But it's the concern over data quality and governance was, I think, the fourth most cited reason for people not using AI and intelligent tech. There was something like 27% of organizations in our survey last year saw data governance as a major barrier to using AI assisted tech because they didn't think they had good data.
Well, and it may be that they're worried that data governance is a barrier because it's the sort of big brother view of, do you have the right ethical standards in place? Do you have the right controls in place? Has your algorithm been appropriately tested? Is there inherent bias? And those are all incredibly important questions to ask. I don't think they're a barrier. I think that what we, as HR professionals, what we need to do is embrace the idea that responsible AI is at the heart of the future of work. We can use AI to make many things easier, but we need to do it responsibly. So I don't see that as the barrier. I think the challenge is in the hygiene and quality of the underlying data that you're training with. Because all good AI is trained on models of some kind.
Right.
So what data you put into it is what it's going to learn from. And if your data is really messy, it's going to learn to live in a world of really messy. And that may not give you the answers that you're looking for. And I think that's hard for people to appreciate when they're designing AI into their operations to support informed decision making. Do you have the right controls and sort of human sensibility and oversight on that decision making process? That's one thing. That becomes even harder when you're actually not talking about AI, when you're talking about good process automation and intelligence system automation, because then it's just right or wrong.
Yeah.
And if you've trained it badly, it's going to give you bad answers and you're going to end up with processes that fail, or worse yet, transactions that are done incorrectly just because of the process automation that you tried to put in place to ease a burden. In the early days of all of this, we would build products that looked great for the client. And we knew that behind the scenes, we had hamsters running on a wheel and people moving spreadsheets around and stuff happening all over the place that we hadn't quite figured out how to automate. But we knew that we also had process checks in place that helped us catch those things. And I think as we modernize more of our work, move to process automation even more than we have so far, and start to adopt AI, the value of the data quality and the data hygiene work that is easy to ignore becomes even more important to the heart of the HR function. It's what allows us to really know that we have tuned this thing so that it will do exactly what we want it to do every time.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah, it's a good aspiration.
Yeah. What have you seen for certain proven practices? Like, do you see a lot of organizations putting together like data councils, some sort of cross-functional group that meets and talks about data governance policies and processes? Or what do you see happening in that space?
Certainly for large multinationals and larger employers, data governance councils are very much part of the fabric of the organization, whether they sit within the data office or are more cross-functional varies quite a bit. The idea that we think about organizing our data into some key domains with areas of accountability for different types of data based on how that data is originated is pretty foundational to how you organize that sort of data governance activity. Beyond that, I think some organizations are very focused on ethics charters, principles of operations. Others are more focused on the dialogue of ownership and documentation of, well, which of these systems is really the provisioning point and the source of truth. And you can get into endless debates about whether that's really the source of truth or not. To me, the important part is having that framework for the conversation and the dialogue and being able to say, well, actually, when it's people-related data, here's who we're going to hold accountable. And when it's procure-to-pay data or transactional finance data or client information, here's who we're going to hold accountable. Client data is always such a fascinating one. And I think it speaks volumes for people data as well. In client organizations, everybody wants to be the owner of their client. But most often, there are people working with that client in 4 or 5 different business lines or product areas or practice groups. And they all think they own the client, but there's only one client. And the same is true with people data. There is one body, it has a name. That person has a right to a certain amount of privacy and entitlement around their own data and how it gets used. And the company has all kinds of interests in tracking their history and understanding things about the way they work and being able to really reflect back a great employment experience, which will only improve their value and their brand as an employer. The different departments that person worked in over time, the different managers they had, the different jobs they held will all sort of change that data over the space of months or years. Doesn't change the fact that they are one individual. And you want to be able to have a really solid time series view of that person.
Yeah. And we want some predictions, right? We want to know what might happen based on all the things that have happened in the past. What could be the future for this person or this group of people? Yeah.
And that's actually one of the most challenging areas of governance, I think, is this idea of how do you use predictive data in a way that is responsible and well-informed, and that the users, the consumers of that data, actually recognize what a prediction tells them. If we publish, I don't know, a nutrition model that says, here are the people who are most likely to leave, and here's a risk score for how far out it might be before they leave. If you hand that to a frontline manager who goes running up to Teri and says, Teri, why are you about to leave? And Teri's like, I'm not leaving. What are you talking
about?
That's a problem. That's putting the information in the wrong hands with the wrong level of knowledge and awareness. And so I think the predictive work, it's so important that our people analytics specialists are at the forefront of that and are educating and deploying those resources in ways that are well-informed, aggregated in a way that can help the company understand materiality of risk, but also protect the innocent along the way.
Yeah. So let's bring this down to kind of the individual level, person listening here today, because I feel like everybody in HR has some level of responsibility for data, even if that isn't your primary focus. You have your responsibility for the data that you're responsible for. But if I want to become, let's say I want to be more expert in this area, or I want to advocate for better data, do you have any suggestions for how people would start to do something like that as they think about how they're going through the same kind of growing pains that you guys are going through at Sanofi, which is we've gotten so big and we can't use the data we want to use it the way we want to use it. How do we sort of bring that down to something manageable where I can start having a conversation?
I think it starts with ruthlessly prioritize. So figure out what is the thing that if you touch one area of your data and make it better, where will that help you the most? Because you can't do everything at once.
Yeah.
And so figuring out where are the quick wins, the things that you can change right away and materially improve a process for your employees or simplify a conversation with finance, the things that are going to help you the most, the fastest. Get some of those quick wins. And then chart a roadmap for the hard stuff. You can't do everything at once. You need to define your priorities and you need to define those requirements that we were talking about earlier, the disambiguation, what are those exceptions? What's that regulatory issue? Invest the time in those conversations because that is what's going to really help you configure your tool set, manage your process end to end, and ultimately get data quality that reflects what you're trying to do.
Start small.
Start smart, start small, pick the things that will make the biggest differences and build a common language. You write down those definitions when you agree to what do we mean by active headcount. Write it down. It doesn't need to be in a fancy tool, but it needs to be somewhere where everybody can reference it and that you are sure you have clarity. And just good basic data hygiene management. If you have, I don't know, an HRIS that have 5 different ways of inputting the person's name. In some countries, the person's name, their surname is all uppercase and their first name is lowercase. And Somewhere else, it's double byte characters because that's what's important in that part of the world. And somebody else has standardized it a different way. You go and look at your list of employees and suddenly you can't read it. Those basics of good data hygiene, it's like dental work. You do the work up front, you avoid the cavities later on.
Yeah.
It's not rocket science, but it is the stuff that will make a huge difference to the usability of your data down the road.
Yeah. Make friends with somebody in the organization that is a real data guru. I think that's always a good friend to have.
And value those skill sets. There are people who love being in the granular detail every single day. And there are people who want to look at the big picture. And data governance is a lot about being able to move between those two fairly well and kind of understand the big picture, recognize when the detail matters, but reward the people who are paying attention to that detail for you because they are the golden ticket in terms of making your data hygiene sustainable in the organization. Yeah. And that may sit in the HR function. It may sit in your people services or shared services team. It may be part of all of your HR generalist roles. Doesn't matter where it sits. It is a high value piece of work that needs to be maintained.
Yeah. Well, this has been very interesting. And I think we should probably think about a follow-on podcast to really get into some of the nitty-gritty. But I think this has been a good overview of kind of where to start, what to think about, who to work with, and really just how to start thinking in general about how you get some of this stuff done. And it's never too early to start. I think if you're a small company, you've got an advantage where you haven't done a whole lot yet. So get started before you get this gigantic behemoth that you have to figure out how you pull back into control.
Well, and likewise, it's never too late, right? Like if you're swimming in that giant bubble bath with all those different bubbles of data around you, it's okay. Pick one, dig in. You can definitely have an impact.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, Danielle, for joining me today. This has been a great conversation. I want to thank our producers, the team at Brand Method Media Group, and our marketing team, Lisa and Summer. And I want to thank you, the audience. Thank you for tuning in. That is all the time we have this week for HR We Have a Problem. If you enjoyed the episode, you can subscribe to it on your favorite podcast app. We'd love it if you'd leave us a review or drop a line and let us know what topics you might like to hear us talk about on the show. We will be back in 2 weeks with another episode of HR We Have a Problem. Thanks, everybody.